Hi guys, Russell here from Homebrew Republic. Welcome to another brew review. Today we're checking out the Mangrove Jacks Czech Pilsener. I want to do something different today, and we're going to approach this review a little bit differently. Instead of making one brew, we're going to make two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the kit and brew it the simplest way possible. I'm going to use the factory yeast, I'm going to add dextrose, I'm going to add water, and I'm going to get going. For the second brew, we're going to take a recipe approach. So I'm going to use a premium brewing yeast, we're going to dry hop, and we're going to use liquid malt extract. And obviously we'll bring both of those back together at the end and compare them in a taste test. This is the kit itself. As we can see, it is the Czech Pilsner. One of my frustrations with these kits is that it's pretty hard to get a really good idea of what you're actually going to get beyond the super high level description being Czech Pilsner. There's never on these cans, it seems like, a lot of information that really tells you about the flavour profile, what hops were used, or really what you're going to get. There is a little bit of information buried right down in the fine print on the back. So really the two sort of key pieces we can get is that the IBU has a range of 32 to 42. IBU, I think it's either 100 or 120 is the full scale. So for me, I would call that like a really nice sort of a cruisy or a mid-level of bitterness, but certainly nothing massively challenging. And our target ABV is 4.5%. Alright, for our first brew, I said I was going to do this the simplest way possible. So I'm going to use the factory yeast. Get the lid off. Factory yeast. Okay, the kit recommends that the yeast is tolerant from 18 to 30. Whenever I'm brewing with really any yeast, I always look at the guideline and I go for the lower end of that. So straight off the cuff, knowing this is 18 to 30, I would be aiming for the 18 to 22 mark. I do note that actually on the instructions it says that for best results brew at 22 degrees. For me right now, this brew is going to go into ambient temperatures. At a guess, I'm just guessing, we're probably going to ferment through at 24, but we'll keep an eye on that and we'll see how it goes. Dextrose. We said we're going to use dextrose in this brew. I know that I spend a lot of time talking about liquid malt extract and my preferences for it, but there's nothing wrong with dextrose. It'll give you a perfectly good brew. And to be honest, I brewed with dextrose for years and I still brew with it every now and then. Today will be one of those examples. Couple of things to note. Actually, one of the reasons I do like dextrose is it's relatively cheaper than liquid malt extract. And if you're looking for like the most cost-effective way to brew, it's using one of these kits and dextrose. Basically for under 30 bucks you can get your brew fermenting and out the other side, and if I exclude your consumables like your sanitizer, your cleaning ingredients and your carbonation drops, you've got under $30 to produce around about 4.5 to 5 dozen beer on the other side of that, which is a pretty good deal in my books, and that's one of the reasons I do love kit brewing. I've always said it's a really cost effective way to brew. With dextrose, there are differences between dextrose and liquid malt extract. You're likely to get potentially a slightly sweeter finish. The other thing you're going to get is if you're using liquid malt extract, you're going to get a little bit more body in the beer and a slightly smoother mouth feel. So your dextrose is also going to support a really, really light bodied finish. Alright, so that's the first brew sorted. It's the kit, it's the factory yeast and dextrose. Simple. Let's talk about our recipe. So I said what I'm going to do is use a premium brewing yeast, I'm going to use liquid malt extract, and I'm going to dry hop. Let's talk about the hops first. I'm going to use the Czech Saz as the finishing hop, and there's a couple of good reasons for that. You'll notice this is a nice small bag. It's a 15-gram bag of finishing hops from Mangrove Jacks. The reason I like the small bags, in this case, when you're just wanting to put a hint of flavour and aroma on the end, you can get the finishing hops in the smaller quantity, which is 15 grams. Instead of buying a full bag of 100 grams or more of hops and having some left over that you've got to figure out what to do with or waste or anything like that. Couple of fun facts about the Czech Saz. As the name would suggest, it comes from the Czech Republic. From what I found online, I believe it is the most widely grown or widely produced hop in the country, and it accounts for over 80% of the hop farms or hop yards in the region. I believe it is the hop that is used in Stella Artois, so a very, very well-known lager, and it is regarded, generally speaking, as the quintessential noble hop, so very much steeped in tradition. The last beer brew I did, which was the Black Rock Lager, and in turn was published as a recipe, which I called a classic lager, I used the Green Bullet hop, and the thing that I remember about the Green Bullet hop was it was described as having a very complex flavour and aroma profile, and I would say that the profile for the Czech Saaz is equally complex as the Green Bullet, with some similarities, but obviously its own unique flavour and aroma profile. So what we get is a soft, pleasantly spicy, herbal with woodsy and earthful tones and a dark floral character. It's also perfectly suited to the brew that we're making. It's regarded as being indispensable in Bohemian style Pilsners or lagers, so it's going to fit in really well with our kit. But it's also noted that it's equally at home in Belgian style ales or Belgian style beers and farmhouse style ales. So probably quite a diverse hop. I mentioned before that one of my frustrations with the kits is they often have very little information on what hops we used in the base malt. The reason, for me at least, I find that interesting or important is if you know what is in the base malt, then you can put a little bit more thought into the hop selection you use if you're going to dry hop. Obviously you want to make sure that you're either building on the existing flavour or at the very least you're going to complement it rather than going way off piste and getting conflicting flavours. But given the name of our kit being the Czech Pilsner, I would be willing to take a cheeky punt that the Czech Saaz has probably been used in that base malt. That's completely unfounded, based on really nothing, but like I said, I'd take a cheeky punt. For my yeast, I've chosen the Safe Lager S189, so as usual what that means is I will discard the factory yeast that came with the kit and use this yeast here. There's primarily two reasons I've chosen this. Number one, it's designed for high drinkability beers, which means it's going to go really well with Pilsners and lagers. But number two, it is known to let off a, depending on the conditions, a noticeable herbal and floral note. So I think this is going to feed really, really well into the flavour profile that we're building up with the hops and complement our brew. What I would note is that the suitable fermentation temperature range is 9 to 22 degrees, but the ideal is 12 to 15. So this brew here, the recipe brew, is going to be going into my temperature control fridge, and we are going to be keeping that temperature down at that lower end of the range and that 12 to 15 mark to be suitable for this yeast. The other yeast that I would have considered, and it was actually the one that I used on the classic lager brew that I did, is the Mangrove Jacks M54 Californian lager yeast. Two reasons I would use that if you're looking for an alternative. One is if you do have any concerns over the flavour profile and going too far up there, the M54 has a really, really clean flavour profile in terms of what the yeast does to the brew. And the second reason is that it ferments far closer to ale temperatures. I'm speaking from memory here, but I think the ideal fermentation temperature range for the M54 is 20 to 22. So there is an alternative there if you want to give that a go. Let's talk about process. I want to keep it really simple right at this minute. I'm going to let some more of the detail come out as we continue to make this video. We're going to get these brews mixed up. We're going to take them down to the garage. I'm going to let the temperatures come down until we get to yeast pitching temperature. The pitching temperature will be different for each brew because we're using different yeasts. I'm going to get the hops into our recipe brew. Keep an eye on what we do with those hops. I'm doing something a little bit different to what I usually do if you've watched any of my past videos. We will let the brews ferment. I expect the fermentation duration will be different for each brew based on the yeast that we're using. The other thing I would note is I always have this loose idea of how long fermentation will take, but it's never a rule. Fermentation is over when our gravity reading is constant for 2 days, but I don't have a hard or fixed date, right? It gets there when it gets there. The other thing I would say is don't ever be afraid to let your brew sit an extra day or even a week. It's going to do it no harm, and if anything, it'll only do good to let it have that little bit longer in your fermenter. For both brews, and I always do this, I rack off into a bottling bucket. I bottle, I use carbonation drops, I use crown top glass bottles. That's really all there is to it. So at this point, I'm going to say too much talking, not enough brewing. Let's get this brew on. Cheers.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Alright guys, welcome to the garage. This is brew number 1, which is our back to basics. So, kit only, dextrose, factory yeast, nothing else, just going to let it go. We are brewing ambient temperature as well. According to the therm strip, we are currently 26. I had said I think we might come down to about 24, but we'll see. This has only been out now for, or sitting in the fermenter for, I don't know, 7 or 8 hours. So it might have a little bit more cooling down. It could come down a bit overnight, but we're going to pitch these here. Here we are, guys. Yeast in. Whoa! Why are you laughing? I did give it a bit of a swish up, which is why we got that sort of foam back on top. Don't worry about the yeast sitting on top, that'll sink in, foam will die down, she's all good. So that's it. Like I said, I'll check on this tomorrow, but otherwise, yeah, I'll leave her be, let her do her thing. This is the one I think will probably ferment through a bit faster. We'll see how we go, but if I was to guess, somewhere between 6 and 8 days is probably what this will take. Alright, let's close the lid. Let her get on with it. Brew number 2, which is our recipe approach. A couple of things I neglected to show this little step, but I've taken my initial original gravity or starting gravity on both. Starting gravity on the straight kit brew is 1.036, and starting gravity or original gravity on this brew 1.040, logically a little bit higher because we've used liquid malt extract. The temperature on this brew is currently 22 degrees. So I have set this to hold down at, I suspect this will go through at about, once it's fermenting, it's got the fermentation temperature in there, it'll probably go through at about 14 degrees. Its ideal range is 12 to 15, so sitting in there. I will keep an eye on it. I might see if I can nudge it down a smidge. And this little guy here, he's something different that we haven't seen before. So, finishing hops is what that is. And what I didn't realise, but I quite like, is they come in a little tea bag, which is really awesome. I read the instructions on the back of the bag, and what they suggested was drop the tea bag with the hops inside it into boiling water and let it steep for 10 minutes. The idea being that you unlock the flavour characteristics and just start the extraction process of those characteristics you're looking for to transfer into the brew, and then you chuck the tea bag, the hops and all that watery goodness in. I did of course sterilise that cup before I used it. I mentioned the temperature, 22 degrees. It is a little bit, in my mind, a little bit high to pitch. To be honest, I'd rather let that come down a little bit, but I'm here now. It is also in the fridge cooling, so it is going to come down pretty quick. So let's get this lid off, we'll get the yeast in, and we'll get those hops, which are going in at the same time. Here we go, guys. Safe Lager S189 yeast going in. Alright, it's in. Now, next element of our ingredient, this guy here, our hops, our tea bag, and that watery goodness that was steeping in. Oh, bit of a splash there. Oh man, got a bit of yeast up the side. Oh well. Potentially might have been a good idea to put those hops in first. Hang on. Just, yeah, there we go. Man, made a little bit of a hash up there, but it'll do. For the record, I did sterilise that spoon as I picked it up. It was sitting in a bucket of steriliser, so it was all good. Alright guys, we'll get this lid back on and then we will leave this be. Same as the other brew, I'll give it a quick little look-see tomorrow, make sure the temperature's in the right place, make a tweak if I have to. Otherwise, I'll be letting this ferment through. Cheers! That's it guys, we are fermenting. This is our basic brew. We are 24 hours after pitching the yeast. So this is holding at 26. In reality, that means it dropped down, the liquid will have dropped down to about 24 degrees. Fermentation creates a little bit of heat, so that'll be the extra couple of degrees there, right? So we're fermenting through at 26 degrees. That is higher than what was suggested as the suitable, but that is how you roll, you know, when you're fermenting in ambient temperatures. It's kind of the risk you run. So for this one, the next time we check in will be when we use finings, which will be when fermentation is over. Until then, we're going to leave it alone. Let's go and check out the recipe brew. Here's our recipe brew, guys. In terms of temperature, the internal temperature in there seems to be around the 15-16 mark. So we're right on the upper end of the ideal range, but well within the full suitable range. If you look real closely in there, you can basically see water level up here, water level down there. So we don't have bubble action going on yet, but it does have pressure in there. So all signs suggest fermentation has started. Again, I'll leave the lid on, so we'll leave that one alone. But same deal. Gonna let this one do its thing, and we won't be touching this until the end of fermentation and finings. All good guys, see you in, I don't know, 6 days, 8 days, something like that. Cheers! Welcome back to the official taste test for our Mangrove Jacks Czech Pilsener. This segment of the video and the video in general has been a long time coming, and I'm super excited to share these brews with you. So as you know by now, what we've done is made two brews. The first brew was a basics brew. How do we get a brew on the most cost effective, the simplest, the quickest way possible? And the second brew was a recipe approach where we used some premium ingredients. Got those two brews here. We're going to pop them open and check out what we got. Before I do, because what we'll do is talk about these brews quite separately, what I would say is the flavour profile of the kit in general. So if you're looking at the kit as a base kit and what it brings, number one is a very, very light, if not delicate, malt character. In terms of the flavour profile, it is very much around that sort of dark floral, earthy herbal notes. It does have that hint of spicy, sort of peppery spiciness on the end, which is actually really, really cool. And that really, really subtle level of bitterness. So for me, that base flavour profile of the kit holds true in these brews, but comes to life in quite a different way, which we'll talk to in a second. In general, really awesome kit, rate it quite highly. The thing that I really like about it is, and I guess for me and a lot of the brewing that I do, I wind up often with some quite strong flavours, and I'm either out with a citrusy tone or out with a fruity tone. So for me, this brew here, to be anchored in something quite different, those herbal, those fruity, those earthy notes, that made it quite different for me and actually really enjoyable, but I'd happily come back to this brew. Earlier on in the video, I talked about, I think I was comparing the Czech hop to the Green Bullet, and on the basis that the Green Bullet had a really complex flavour profile. I would agree with that. I preferred this kind of flavour profile over that which was created by the Green Bullet. But it's personal preference there. So let's crack one of these brews open. We're going to start with the basics brew. Alright, bottle, glass, pouring. Would you look at that? That's awesome, eh? Alright, so first thing while we're checking this out is have a look at that head. It has a really, really nice head. What I noticed about the head, which we'll talk about again when we have a look at the recipe brew, is this head is crystal white. It's really, really nice. I've got a feeling, no, I don't want to say it because I don't remember. I can't remember if I put findings in this or not. What I will say is it's definitely not as clear as what I would normally get these kind of brews. It's not bad, just not quite where I'd normally get it to. So I definitely didn't cold crash this. At the most, all I did was use findings. But it's come up okay. Like I said, not crystal clear by any stretch, but it is okay. In terms of the colour, we have a really, really nice light gold colour, especially when the light gets into it. Right. Flavour profile, pretty much exactly so how I described before. Dark, floral, hints of earthy, hints of herbal, and a nice little spiciness on the back. It's really awesome. What I like about this is it is really crisp. It's easy drinking. The next two things I would note. Number one, incredibly light body, which is what we would expect from dextrose. For me, perfect summer drink, like especially on those hot days where you don't want anything too heavy, you don't want to get bloated. It's really awesome for that. The downside is, as well as being light bodied, is potentially the body. So the downside of dextrose is what it tends to do is give a very watery texture in terms of its finish. It really does nothing to the brew to give you any texture. Now, whether you think of that as a downside or not is probably going to depend on your personal preferences, but it does have, you could call it a light body, but you can also say that the brew has a very, very watery texture to it. The next thing that I would say is that the dextrose has given the brew a real sweet tone to it, particularly in the, probably through the flavour, but also as an aftertaste. It's got quite a strong sweetness on it. And what's interesting about that sweetness, I do think that's going to come down to your personal preferences. I shared a glass of this with my father-in-law, and the first thing he said was, "It's too sweet, I don't like it," and didn't want another one. But at the same time, I shared a pint of this with one of my neighbours, and he turned around and said, "That's really, really nice." So, you know, how you feel about sweetness and what you think of it is completely personal perspective. The other thing I would say is this is now 10 weeks old, which is longer than I would normally have left it to get to the point of doing this review here. I started drinking this at 4 weeks, and when I had that first glass, that was the first thing I noticed. I was like, "Oh, the sweetness," and it was too much for me. I didn't like it. Like if you'd asked me to judge it there and then, it wasn't working for me. But particularly once this hit the 8-week mark, I noticed the sweetness really drop off, really settle down. So it's that old chestnut, and like we've always said, the brews will get better up to, they'll reach their premium about 3 months, between 8 and 12 weeks, 2 to 3 months. And I think that's what's happened here. The sweetness, the flavour profile in general has just really settled down. I noticed a distinct change around the 8-week mark, and it's actually gotten really nice. In fairness, that was one of the differences between, you know, the person who I said didn't like the sweetness. They tried it with me at 4 weeks. The neighbour who said they really liked it tried it at 8 weeks. So that could have been an influencing factor as well. But overall, really, really good outcome. Despite those, not necessarily criticisms, but those factors to consider on the end, I gave this brew a 6 on the Home Brew Republic brew scale. So for me, highly, highly drinkable. I do think some people will like it, some people won't. It will probably come down to their personal preferences, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's a great drinking brew, especially if you're happy to let it mature a little bit longer into that 8 to 10 week mark before you really start to drink it. Next brew. The recipe. Right. One of the things I've noticed in general, have a look at that head. There's a lot more volume in that head. And what we'll also see is a lot more retention in that head. What I notice with, especially when using liquid malt extract, is that the head isn't quite as pure white as what we saw. It tends to have a slightly off-white tinge to it, which I assume is just as a result of using that malt extract. But have a look at the difference in those colours. This one here, a lot more golden, really light, really bright gold. This one here, still golden, but has a lot more depth to the colour. This one here did get cold crashed, did have finings, and has come up a lot better in terms of its finish. Alright. This one here is now just on 8 weeks, maybe just over 8 weeks. The main difference between these two is this one here has a lot more malt character. So that kind of flavour profile that I've been talking about, that dark floral, earthy notes, herbal notes, spicy pepperiness, very much holds true. But we've got a lot more malt character coming through. And to be honest, it's gotten a lot better now that we've hit 8 weeks. Again, I tried this one when it was 4 weeks, and it didn't feel like it was working. The malt character was a lot less settled, so I sort of felt like the brew was out of balance. The malt character had become the dominating factor. And it wasn't fully working. It was also it was a very sweet malt character. So I'm guessing if you like malt character, then you'll probably enjoy this. For me, I feel, if you'd asked me when these brews were 4 weeks, which one was better, I would have said the Basics Brew. Now that they've both hit that time period where they're reaching the peak of their flavour, I would say that they're as good as each other, but in their own way. And if you ask me based on my personal preference, I would say that I prefer the Basics from a flavour profile perspective, but I prefer this one for the little extra body and the smoothness which the liquid malt extract has given it. But again, I would stress the difference between drinking this at 4 weeks and 8 weeks. This is far better now. It was nowhere near as good as it was at 4 weeks. Very drinkable at 4 weeks, but this is now good. The other thing I would say is I don't know that I would use the light liquid malt extract again. I used the light one. Well, intentionally I stayed with Mangrove Jacks for this recipe. Mangrove Jacks don't have an ultralight liquid malt extract, they've only got light. I think where my head is starting to go to is if I'm brewing a lager or a pilsner, and in some case pale ales, that I'll be going straight into an ultralight liquid malt extract, in which case I'll be using the Black Rock liquid malt extract. Like I said, not bad, just I feel like it's building up a big malt character, and a brew like this has kind of stepped away from the intended style of the brew. If you like your malt character, this might be great for you. If I was to have my time again, this brew, the recipe brew, I would have done exactly what I did, except I would have used ultralight, and I think this would have been phenomenal. This one here, the Basics Brew, what I would want to address is that sweetness. I think that's what's holding the brew back, but then we're starting to step into, like, away from that basics concept and into a, ingredient variations. Couple of things though. We used dextrose, and there are alternatives. We could have used an enhancer, which is generally a combination of malt extracts and dextrose, so that would have started to hopefully dial the sweetness back and give us some malt character without really building up the malt character. The other thing we could have done is look at a liquid brewing sugar. I've never used liquid brewing sugar before, but I have just added them to my site. When I was looking at the manufacturer kind of marketing blurb on them, what they promoted as one of the benefits is getting a slightly drier finish, so not getting that sweetness that really comes through with dextrose, and that might have been a nice way to keep some of the characteristics that we've really liked, like the light colour, whilst potentially creating a little bit of body without the sweetness. What that has led me to though is this question around dextrose versus enhancer versus liquid brewing sugar versus liquid malt extract. Really, when you line those up, what is the key benefit of each? What will it do to the finish of my brew, and sort of in terms of texture or body? How will it impact my brew in terms of the flavours and necessarily the aroma profile? So to my way of thinking, what I have is the start of a test case, because I have a dextrose brew and a liquid malt extract brew. So what I'm going to do, not on this video, next video, I'm going to do 2 more brews with the Czech Pilsener. I'm going to tackle that question. The next 2 brews I do, I'll do one with an enhancer and one with a liquid brewing sugar, with the goal of answering that question. What's the difference between them? How do they affect fermentation? How do they affect the finish, both in terms of the texture or the body, and then the flavour profile, and what do we get? To be clear, what I'm not trying to do with that question is say that one is better than the other. I think what we'll find is they're all well suited to particular use cases or particular finishes depending on what you want. But I think the idea is, how do we answer that question so that we can choose the one we want and get the finish we want for the given brew that we're doing. This seems like a good place to start wrapping this up. What I would say is I super enjoyed this process of making 2 brews. Hope you guys enjoyed the process and the video. If you did, feel free to subscribe. Feel free to give us a thumbs up. Really helps us out and we really appreciate it. A lot of you guys know by now, if you drop a comment or ask a question in the bottom, I'm happy to engage in conversation. Have some great videos coming up. The next one I'm going to get onto or start making is that kind of how-to brewing question we just talked about. The next brew review you see is another one where I make 2 brews, and that was a pale ale. I do already have another one which I actually bottled last night, which again is another 2 brews, a basics review and a recipe. That one I'm really looking forward to because the taste tests out of the trial jars were amazing. That was a lager from the Black Rock range. What I will say though is that's going to be the last lager you see for a while, because after that I'm going to do something different that I've never done before, both in terms of a style of beer that I've never brewed, and also a recipe approach in terms of how we'll bring that recipe together. Not going to say too much because I've got a few more things to work out, but all that said, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks guys, appreciate you watching, appreciate your support, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.